Was Jesus mistaken about the mustard seed? One of the best-known skeptical New Testament scholars, Bart Ehrman, has said that this passage was one of the reasons he stopped believing in biblical inerrancy when he was a Christian. So let's take a look together at what Bart Ehrman has to say.
Mark in chapter 4, Jesus gives the parable of the mustard seed, and he says the mustard seed, which is the smallest seed on earth. Mustard seed's not the smallest seed on earth. But if you're a fundamentalist, it's got to be literally true down to the, you start seeing stuff like that, and it shakes you. And it makes you reconsider things. So that was the beginning of my reconsidering thing.
So that's Bart Ehrman's argument. Now, before we jump in, I want to be very clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This video isn't an attempt to prove biblical inerrancy as a whole. That's a much larger discussion. The question I'm asking today is much narrower. Does this passage actually contain the error Bart Ehrman says it does? Because if it doesn't, then I don't think it serves as a good reason by itself to reject biblical inerrancy. So let's examine the evidence. This parable appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All three communicate the same basic teaching, although each author includes slightly different wording and different levels of detail. That's exactly what we'd expect when multiple authors recount the same teaching of Jesus. Since Bart specifically cites Mark's account, and Mark also gives the most detailed version of the three, that's the one we'll examine today. And just to be as fair as possible, let's not appeal to paraphrasing or summarizing. Let's simply assume Mark accurately records Jesus' words exactly, and they were meant to be literal, and ask one question. Do Jesus' actual words, as recorded in Mark's Gospel, contain an error? In Mark chapter 4, verse 30 to 32, Jesus says, "And he said, with what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable shall we use for it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when sown on the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes larger than all the garden plants and puts out large branches, so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." At first glance, someone might read that and conclude, Jesus is saying the mustard seed is the smallest seed anywhere on planet Earth. But is that actually what he says? I don't think it is. Notice the first phrase, when sown. The Greek verb is sparrow. It means to sow, to scatter seed for planting, or to plant for cultivation. In other words, Jesus isn't talking about every seed that exists anywhere in nature. He's talking about seeds intentionally planted or sown by farmers. Now notice the next phrase. Interestingly, the ESV translate the same Greek word, "gi," two different ways in this verse. First as ground, and then as earth. Like many Greek words, "gi" has a range of meanings. Depending on the context, it can refer to earth, land, ground, soil, or even a particular region. So I think it's more natural to understand Jesus as speaking about seeds intentionally sown in the land by first-century farmers of his particular region, rather than making a universal statement about every seed on the planet at that time anywhere on Earth. In researching this passage, I haven't found historical evidence that first-century Palestinian farmers regularly sowed a seed smaller than the mustard seed. If this passage is going to be used as evidence that Jesus made a mistake, then I think it's reasonable to ask for historical evidence that first-century Palestinian farmers actually sowed a smaller seed. And the burden of proof would be on the person alleging the mistake. As far as I've been able to determine, that evidence hasn't been produced by anyone. So the claim Jesus is making is much narrower than the critics often assume. Within its historical and agricultural context, I think his statement is literally accurate. Now, of course, the primary point of this parable isn't classifying seeds. Jesus is illustrating that God's kingdom begins with humble beginnings and grows into something remarkably great. That's the point of the parable. But I don't think this passage, even when broken down literally, demonstrates the error that critics often claim it does. And again, none of this proves biblical inerrancy as a whole. It simply shows that one of the most commonly cited examples, even by a known scholar, of an alleged error doesn't appear to be an error at all. If you know of historical evidence that first century Palestinian farmers regularly sowed a smaller seed than the mustard seed, then put it in the comments below so I can look into it further. Otherwise, I think this passage is a good reminder that before concluding the Bible contains a specific contradiction, it's worth at least slowing down, examining the original language, looking at the historical context, and asking whether we're reading the text the way Jesus' original audience would have understood it. So thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and leave any comments you want me to read below. And as always, God bless.